Hi, my name's David, and welcome to another episode of Your First Dev Job podcast, where we learn about the truth of what it actually takes to get your first dev job. Today, we have a special guest, Colby. I saw Colby make YouTube videos as he was doing his coding bootcamp, and I resonated with that because I also made vlogs about my coding experience as I took the bootcamp. And I liked how he was very analytical of his approach and wanted to give back to the audience and share what he has learned. So Colby, thank you for coming on. Why don't you introduce yourself, say where you're based out of, and a brief overview of where you're at in your coding journey.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, David. I really appreciate it. It's great to meet you. And yeah, I do a fair amount of outreach to try to find people to interview as well. So I get the hustle for sure. So first off, I really appreciate that. My name is Colby. I am based out of Oregon. I live in Central Oregon, so it's nice and warm out here most of the season. Not as rainy as most people picture Oregon being, so that's nice. As far as my coding journey, it's been unique, at least in my opinion. It's been about 2 years since I console logged my first Hello World, and it's been about probably 9 to 12 months that I've taken learning to code relatively seriously. I started a coding bootcamp about 5 months ago now, and for various reasons that we can talk about, or that if we don't talk about, you can find plenty of details on my YouTube channel. That went south. There was a lot of problems with the instructional quality, and ultimately all of the students ended up dropping the cohort except for 2, and then promptly after that they shut the entire cohort down. So not exactly the white picket fenced experience you hear a lot about on different boot camps websites and whatnot. So I'm ultimately grateful that happened. I got a lot of my money back, so that was good. But I kind of have the opportunity to take a step back and really address a lot of the fundamentals that I'm not so sure are really looked at deeply enough through the coding bootcamp experience. So yeah, while it was a minor setback, here I am kind of back to self-teaching for the time being. And yeah, I'm excited. I was quite fortunate to land a position while I was in bootcamp. To be honest with you, that it was kind of the right opportunity at the right time and at the right experience level. And I was able to get through. So I'm working right now as a junior rep developer, and I am working part-time right now, and I'm set to go full-time in the next 4 to 6 weeks. So yeah.
Got it. Yeah, that's a crazy journey you had so far, and we can definitely dive through it. So what made you get into coding in the first place where you're starting to take it seriously?
So for a while now, probably for about 5 years, I grew up in a very blue collar background. So my dad did basically any manual labor job that you can imagine. And since I was about 10, he's been taking me along for a lot of his working experience. So I
Okay.
learned a lot of really valuable things through that, not the least of being, having a reasonably high work ethic, and kind of taking pride in your work. I got a lot from pursuing that, and pursued it myself for a while. I've ran a window cleaning business for the past 5 years, just in my small hometown, and that's gone quite well. That said, over the last roughly decade, I've watched what happens after decades of manual labor to the body. My dad is very much so disabled at this point, and that's largely attributed to just his work lifestyle, essentially. So to be honest and vulnerable with you, I guess I got quite existentially anxious about what the downstream effects of working in the blue collar world for um, multiple decades um, would have on my body. And I started to experience some of that. So that's like the high level view. So at that point, I decided, okay, I need to find a way to produce using my brain instead of my body. Did not find code right away. I was in sales for about 3 years. I did
Okay.
reasonably well at that. Um, I'm not the most agreeable person, and that kind of suits that position well, being able to,
What
you know,
what industry were you doing sales in?
I spent a couple. I spent most of my time in recreational like power sports. I
Okay.
sold motorcycles, and then kind of moved on to selling like the big 30 to $50,000 side by sides and stuff. And then eventually I sold RVs as well, so motorhomes, travel trailers, stuff like that. So it's a great industry. It's a lot of fun. I would definitely recommend it to um, young people like that are looking to cut their teeth and make more than minimum wage. But um,
Hmm.
it's very yeah, it's very intensive, and you have to really like people. So um, yeah, I mostly like people. So having to go out every single day for multiple years and make conversation with strangers and try to close them, kind of it just got a little old after a while. So I started to kind of consider producing in a different way. And I'm trying to think of how I even heard about like being a developer in the first place. I think I probably stumbled upon one of Chris Sean's videos. He was a guy that I watched a lot early on and still dabble in, although he's not producing as much. I wish he'd produce more videos because he's a cool guy. But yeah, there's something like that. So I bought the Udemy Bootcamp course by Colt Steele and worked my
Yeah.
way through a lot of that. Um, Tried out Zero to Mastery, and then eventually decided to go the boot camp route. So that basically gets us caught up to now. So
Yeah. That's interesting because I also had a sales job previously working as a nightclub promoter. So I can relate like talking to people all the time, having a fun job and all. But I also didn't see a long-term future with it. So I like it's complete opposite of talking to people just being in front of your computer
yeah,
all day. So that's how I got into it. And then I would see like Instagram ads and about coding boot camps, and I guess, and then looking at job boards of like the pay for developer jobs. That's what convinced me to do it. Awesome. And then, so what made you take the coding boot camp after the uh, Udemy course?
yeah. So I I think one of the things that you learn after beginning to execute on learning how to code, if you're doing the self-taught route, is that there can be a lot of structure within a course, um, and that's great. However, pursuing a career as a web developer or software engineer or data scientist is um, a bit more complex than just taking a course from front to back. And I have a relatively uh, disciplined approach to things. That said, I don't know what I don't know, and therefore, I think I have the ability and the personality to make it through something like a coding boot camp, and the structure that's kind of prescribed through a lot of the boot camp models was very favorable to me. I really liked that they, yeah, I like the structure in general of what boot camps are doing and hopefully doing relatively reliably, even though my experience is was contradictory to that. The structure is very appealing because you work yourself through a course, um, especially with something like Colt um, Colt Steels. It's very much so code along near the end. You do 20 hours of code along, and it feels like you've built something. But you sit down at your IDE a week later, and
And I
executing. Yeah, yeah. It's tutorial hell, and it's almost inevitable to get stuck in that unless you're constantly building projects, or have a very detailed, specific curriculum with access to people that you can consult on a regular basis. So that was kind of the structure that I was aiming to get out of the coding bootcamp experience, and that's what ultimately led me to make that decision. So
Yeah, there's a gap between following tutorial and actually create your own coding projects. And I think that's what coding bootcamps help solve by giving you projects. And I'm also working on a program to help this as well, um, solve the gap. So then you took, was it with General Assembly?
yeah,
Right. So then you sign up for this course, and then you realize it didn't it didn't it wasn't seeming it wasn't meeting your expectations of what you initially thought it was gonna be, right? So can you elaborate?
yeah, yeah. So there, I mean, initially it was great. Um, in hindsight, I think it was great for me because I had already learned a lot of what we were going through. By the time I got into GA, not really from a project standpoint, but from like a understanding curriculum standpoint, I had basically gotten HTML and CSS down for the most part, and I was uh, advanced beginner at JavaScript. I won't say I was like intermediate at it, but I understood how to write some um, reasonably complex functions and um, integrate with APIs and stuff like that. So
Nice.
I think that the first 6 weeks were acceptable to me, largely because I already had a grip on the curriculum. But there's a few things that were kind of red flags right away. First off, on the second day, our TA turned his camera off and didn't turn it on for the next 10 weeks. And the participation of him in our cohort was similar. Very minimal contribution, and people were clearly, unfortunately, falling behind in the cohort. And they would ask questions, and reasonably, the teacher, the lead instructor, would answer the question, elaborate on it a little bit, but then a lead instructor has to move on in a boot camp that has a fixed amount of time to it. The lead instructor's job is to do as high of a quality job as he or she possibly can in a limited amount of time. So you have to
Okay.
move on after a certain point, and that's why there's TAs, in my opinion. At that point, if somebody is struggling with that office hours, and TAs are supposed to be able to pick up a reasonable amount of slack in something that a student may or may not be understanding fully. And that just unfortunately wasn't happening. Like I said, the TA had his camera off the entire time, would never contribute. Sometimes my lead instructor would say, like, hey, we'll say Frank, hey, Frank, do you have anything to add to this before we wrap up class? And Frank just wouldn't be there. Like, he wouldn't respond. It was clear that he was, out eating ice cream or something. So that was a bummer. I don't know how, I can't speak for my fellow students, but it made me feel kind of undervalued as a just straight up as like a customer of General Assembly. And it sucked. So that was the first red flag. The side effect of that was that most of the other students started falling behind. By the time we were in the second module, kind of entering the back end side of things, a lot of the a lot of my fellow students, over half of my fellow students, couldn't even write a function from scratch that would like multiply two two inputs, so two parameters together. So that was unfortunate. And yeah, not too long after that, I decided to drop the cohort. And then yeah, right after that, all but two of the students in my cohort dropped as well. And then General Assembly shut down the entire cohort. Um, so, yeah.
Yeah, that's tough. Uh, I took a coding boot camp, and I think I was one of those people that was behind, and I felt like I was like a module or two catching up, from the rest of the boot camp. But I eventually pulled through and figured it all out of the concepts. But I think it's tough because I think it's kind of designed that way to be fast, tough, and but they don't communicate that. So at times that's why I thought that it's going to be that tough. Um, would have been nicer if the expectation was that it's going to be hard.
Yeah, I think that that expectation is communicated. I think honestly, not to like get too into the weeds with this, but I think it's fundamentally it's like the game theory of coding boot camps is a little bit off because it's strictly a for-profit institution, and there's not a ton of incentive um, in keeping students caught up. And if they're falling behind, there's not a lot of incentive to catch them up. Um, if that can kind of just be swept under the rug. So there's like refund deadlines in coding boot camps, for example, and if you surpass that refund deadline, you know, you owe the full tuition. From what I've heard from a lot of people who work for coding boot camps that for now at least will remain unnamed, like the name of the game is keeping people enrolled that long so that they're due that amount. And then if they drop after that, you know, it's fine because the students that end up graduating will be slightly more qualified than the ones who drop, and that still gives them reasonable placement rates. So I'm not as cynical as I sound about all of this, by the way. It's just this is pure speculation, but it does seem to me like the incentives for like Flatiron, General Assembly, these boot camps where it's like pay this lump sum, get this amount of teaching duration, and then good luck. There's something a little bit off about the incentives there, and I'm not proposing a solution necessarily. I think a subscription based solution is probably maybe the beginning of the right approach, but again,
Right.
I'm not claiming to be a genius business person, but I do think the incentives are off a little bit.
That's why I'm working towards a subscription based learning.
Cool.
And then yeah, so when you took this coding bootcamp, that was also the time you created your YouTube channel, right? Your coding YouTube channel. What was the inspiration behind that?
Yeah, as soon as I decided to attend General Assembly, I started making YouTube videos. So I think like maybe 2 months before GA, I started making videos, and that was like some of my first few videos were comparing GA to other coding boot camps. The two big ones I was kind of comparing were Flatiron and GA. I ended up doing GA because their part-time cohorts do live lectures. But anyways, the YouTube thing was, you know, I've always wanted to start a YouTube channel, but I've never really had a consistent reason to do so. I really enjoyed like riding motorcycles. I made a couple moto vlogs once, and that was fun. But yeah, I never really had anything that I've persistently. To be honest with you, David, this is the first thing in my life that I've like stuck with for this long. Um, and like I'm very much so like a bee, like going and pollinating a bunch of different flowers. I've so anyways, all that to say, I decided that, you know, I'm going to become a software engineer in the next several years. So I might as well document this and share it with other people. And yeah, there is that like philanthropic side of it. I'm just interested in like helping give people information. In addition, there's plenty of personal incentives to do so. You know, you can monetize on YouTube. There's affiliate stuff that you could do. So that's cool. And then most of all, being able to meet people. I mean, you reached out to me because you saw my YouTube videos, and that's awesome. I've met half a dozen people who have reached out to me personally, just from posting YouTube videos. And the goal was never to. It's not necessarily to like get big and have a ton of subscribers, but the quality of return on, like, I have like 700 subscribers right now. It's amazing the return that I've gotten just from like that relatively small following. So that's been really cool. So I don't know if that's why I started doing it, but it's certainly why I'm going to continue doing it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I hope you keep doing it. I've also changed things a lot. Like I've had multiple careers before getting into coding, so I can relate to like and like hobbies and sports and different interests like that as well. So that's great. And now you said you got a job. How did that happen?
Good question. I honestly, at the time, I wasn't even actively applying necessarily to jobs. Um, and yeah, frankly, I don't know if I have much advice to give here because a lot
Mhm.
of it was a lot of like the reason why I got this job was just luck, to be totally honest with you. The position that I got is was part-time. Like I said, I'm going full-time
Yeah.
relatively soon. It's remote, but the company is based out of my local area. So you might have some insight on this, but I think that's a tax thing that most companies do that. Like you're based in this area and they want somebody from that area. I think it's probably just a tax, like they just do that for tax reasons or maybe cultural reasons. I don't know. But in any case, they were looking for somebody in Central Oregon who was willing to work remote. It's an entry level web developer position. Um, and Yeah, I saw the job description. It literally said in the job description that they were looking for the kind of like a kind of candidate that potentially like just graduated from a coding boot camp. So all of my imposter syndrome essentially went away when I saw that. And I said, okay, I guess I'll just apply to this one position. And that's what I did, man. I mean, I applied. I made sure, like I said, a lot of this was luck. So I don't have a ton of advice to give. The main thing that I would say is I was very deliberate when I submitted that application. So I filled out the app, spent some time writing a cover letter, and then reached out to the recruiter on LinkedIn. I sent him an email with a couple of paragraphs, and in that email, I attached a Loom, like a little video saying hello. I had this microphone and like a different background, but it looked good. Um, and just
Okay.
told him that I was excited about the opportunity, et cetera, et cetera. And then every time I talked to anybody along the entire interview process, I did the same thing, an email with a couple of paragraphs and a Loom, like saying their name, saying it was great to meet them, that I was excited about the position. For the actual like technical interview that I had, there were some things that I stumbled on a little bit. I addressed them and made it clear that I had done my research on them and was very excited about the role, et cetera, et cetera. So that I would say that's what got me the job. Honestly, is making sure that the recruiter and the people who were interviewing me saw my face and heard my voice regularly and knew that I was in it. So
That's a interesting approach at creating new videos. Like, did the boot camp teach you that, or how'd you come up with that idea?
yeah, I've had a couple of like just private mentors over the
Okay.
last year or so. One of them, Eric Crawford, you can look him up on Mentor Cruise if you'd like. I would highly recommend him to. He's not technical, but he has been a project manager for many years, and he specializes, in my opinion, in prospecting for new clients. And just hearing all I had to hear from him was a couple of case studies of times where he had a story once of a contract that he landed with a high-end espresso machine making company because it all started because he found somebody's business card on a beach. Um, and he landed like a multiple six-figure contract from that from finding that card. So the way that he did that was being hyper personal. And so I kind of thought in his mindset in order to when it came to my approach with trying to land that first position, and ultimately it ended up paying off. So he didn't specifically tell me to like put a Loom in there, but I kind of thought, what would Eric do? And that's what I did, and that's where it got me.
Nice, because that's good that you took the initiative on it. Because I think it's a growing, even though they were asking for it, I think one-sided interviews is going to be a growing trend where you create videos of yourself answering interview like questions, uh, especially as things are remote. Um, that's what I've seen in the, especially in the tech industry.
Interesting.
There was another point. Uh, so I lost my thought
That's
with
right.
it. Um, but how many did you apply to a lot of jobs before this?
No, I honestly, I've refrained from telling very many people this, but it was the only job I applied for.
No,
So that was definitely like that was definitely part of the luck. And also just like honestly, when I saw the job posting, it just seemed too right to not apply. I wasn't even thinking about applying at that time to positions. But I saw that position and I just thought there's nothing I can lose by applying for this, so I might as well. It literally fits my exact description, so let's just move forward with this one and see what happens. And it just happened to, I'm sorry, I don't have the story of throwing out 200
no,
applications before I got that first position. But yeah, that's
it's
just
a good
my story so far.
it's a good perspective. Yeah, I had another colleague from my current company in our program. We had an apprenticeship program, and it was the only job she applied to, and she was able to get it as opposed to me, but I had applied to 500. But
That's more
yeah,
it sounds like that's the more realistic expectation, honestly. And I don't think it's over for me, to be honest with you. I think in future, when I'm job hunting in the future, I'm sure that I'll pay the piper in grinding out applications. So I'll be there with you guys shortly,
yeah.
I'm sure.
But yeah, I remember the point that I wanted to make. I think one of the main reasons why you got it was that they were looking for an entry level developer, and you were an entry level developer, so it was the match. I find that some advice out there is that controversial to some other advice I see, like don't sell yourself short if you're a junior developer. Just say you're a developer. But I think by knowing where your skill set, being humble, like this is where I'm at, the jobs this job is incredibly hard. And then applying for knowing where you're at and finding companies that are hiring where you're at is key to getting it. And then you mentioned that in the job listing that they said they're taking coding bootcamp graduates. A tip that I discovered is that you can put coding bootcamp in the search bar, and that will find companies that are looking for coding bootcamps.
Very
Have you heard
cool.
of that?
No,
No.
that's a great tip though. Yeah.
You mentioned that during the technical interviews, you felt like you stumbled on some questions, right? What did you learn about that?
Um, I think that first off, like the technical quote unquote interview that I had was not extremely technical. It was relatively straightforward. I was asked a couple of questions about um, JS, but it was primarily like design based. Like he showed me some HTML and CSS and asked me, "What would you change about this?" So the company that I work for is a web marketing company. So things like semantic HTML and not using like deprecated um, uh, selectors and attributes in CSS and things like that are very important. So anyways, I just kind of missed a couple of minor details, nothing major at all, but um, I think it's to be expected. Um, I don't think it's reasonable to expect yourself to excel in the interview process, especially right away. Um, so I think probably the worst thing that you could do in that situation is freeze or let that pit in your stomach grow when you're not totally sure if you're on the right track or if you get stuck. Um, I think that you can go a little bit. This is me talking to myself. You can go a little bit easier on yourself in terms of your own expectations of how an interview should go. It's not going to be perfect. And the sooner that you accept that, the sooner you can like get back to learning about the things that matter, and yeah, therefore further qualifying yourself for that position. So
Right. So expecting that you're not going to be perfect during technical interviews, right? Because technology is so vast and their job does a specific thing in technology, and they're asking you about that specific thing,
right.
and it's like it's hard to know. You can't know them all. So yeah,
Yeah, and I
you
mean,
just have to stay calm.
additionally, with like larger companies, I think you could probably speak to this more. But from what I've heard, there's a lot of interview questions that you're going to get asked that like you can't come to a complete solution for in a 60 to 90-minute technical interview. It's just not possible. So most of it. The point of those questions being asked in the first place is to evaluate how you approach problem solving. So that's the thing to kind of focus on. So
Right. I would say they are looking for someone. Yeah, the kind of design to not be solvable in that
right.
time frame,
Yeah.
and you can't be like freaking out during these. You have to stay calm, be positive, so and have a belief that you're gonna figure it out and show that to the other engineers so they see you someone that they'll be willing to work with.
Yeah.
Awesome. So your job is with marketing. Like, do you have clients? Do you build websites for various clients, or how does that work?
Yeah. So I'm working for a agency that has been around for 35 years. So it's pretty old company. And a couple of decades ago, they wrote their own proprietary CMS.
Okay.
And they stopped updating it quite a while ago now. And they have about, they have tens of dozens of websites that are still on this proprietary CMS that need to be migrated over to WordPress. So a lot of my job, honestly, a lot of my job right now is not even like full on developer work. I'm doing a lot of content editing and stuff as like a primary thing. I'm currently working on not automating, but like writing best practices for how to migrate that content so that, potentially in the next, several months, I can, if the if the company has plans to do this, they can hire a content person, and I can move on to more advanced theme development, and actually working with JavaScript and PHP and building out themes, and um, potentially eventually doing consults with clients and stuff like that. So that's kind of my secret plan. It's not so secret, but yeah, that's kind of what I'm aiming for in this first position. So yeah.
Got it. That's awesome.
Yeah,
So this job, you didn't know anyone, right? You just found it on LinkedIn and you applied.
correct. Yeah.
Okay. So I also saw on one of your YouTube videos, you mentioned that you should build like a website or fix something on a for the company. Do you recall?
Yeah,
But you didn't do this for this scenario, right?
I did not.
I want to challenge you. Do you still you got your job without using that advice? Do you still like advocate on it?
I think that I mean, let's see. That's a good question. I think that it really depends. Uh, to fully like understand and implement a viable solution for a tech company is quite a feat if you don't have insight into their code base.
Yeah, you have to
So
be an insider. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's probably um yeah, I think that's probably more often the case than not. Um, if I was doing something like trying to pursue a job that I'm in right now, I and and it was proving tough. I may still consider doing something like that. I think I would go more along the lines of like, is there a if there's like, it depends on what your approach is, but if you're interested in being a developer and you're not like hyper interested in going into tech specifically, like working at a big tech company, there's a lot of businesses that have websites that I'm very interested in, that need software engineers, or web developers. So I have considered looking at these companies' websites that have a reasonable amount of flaws and like design issues and maybe some bugs. I have considered going in and actually recreating a landing page for them, and like, so I think most recently that's kind of what I've considered. But um, I don't think if you're applying to, um, I'm not confident that if you were trying to get a job at Google that you could simply build out something with no real insight into their code base. That sounds like quite the enormous feat, and I'm not sure that would be worth the extra, like the massive amount of time it would take to do that. But if you're a good WordPress developer, and you're interested in working for a specific company, it might not hurt to build out a theme for that business and say like, hey, I built this theme for you. Look, here's your website. It just looks nicer now, or is more functional, or here's a small component that you might add to your website, etc. So I think I would still advise some people to do that sometimes, depending on their situation.
Right. That's good that you elaborate. Yeah, it depends on the scale of the application, um,
Yeah.
that it could work. I've also saw, if you don't mind me challenging another video, I saw you on like Don
Yeah.
Developer. Uh, you went on his video, right? And uh, you asked him when you should start applying for jobs, and then he said just follow Bootcamp,
Yeah.
and you have to do it at the end. But you got the job applying like like halfway before even halfway, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I'll make it worse. I'll make it worse. I mean, he told me specifically not to check out of the boot camp's process, and I dropped it completely. So yeah, I did not follow Don's advice on that one. So yeah. Um, look, I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure what to tell you, David. Like I said, the job description just it fit too well for it to not
yeah,
make sense for me to apply. So that's what I did. So I I never claimed to follow my own advice.
no, but that's awesome that you got the job. So
I agree. And I mean, you make a good point is like I think that I aspire to be a competent engineer and to know what I'm talking about. But in reality, like my YouTube channel is just one perspective of one random guy that you've probably never met in person. So, like, take what I say with a grain of salt. I'm learning this too. I'm just talking about what I'm learning as I go. And I think you just gave me an idea. I think in a couple of years I can go back and roast my own advice. That might be a fun video. So yeah.
interesting. Yeah, you learn things as you do them and share what you learn at the time.
Yeah.
This is awesome. Really appreciate you uh coming on. I hope you don't mind me asking about some things you posted. And now, any there's a lot of aspiring developers out there. Any last piece of advice uh, that you've learned through this journey of learning the code, getting the job?
Well, you mentioned one thing earlier, that I wanted to elaborate on, and this is something that I've talked about since I started my YouTube channel, and it's something that I definitely still, if you challenged me on it, I definitely still stand by it. Um, if you're looking to like get into tech, I would challenge you to not like I don't want to say like settle, but there are positions that you're qualified for, especially out of boot camp, and it might not be the title of software engineer right away. So there are alternative approaches to getting into tech, and a lot of people don't consider them. And a lot of currently working or recently laid off software engineers aren't considering it. So some of the positions, I wasn't even planning on applying for developer jobs or software engineering jobs after boot camp because of how tight the market has gotten. I was actually considering looking into like QA engineering positions, customer CSE, customer service, customer support engineer roles, things like that that are semi-technical, require you to sometimes write scripting for testing and require semi-technical approaches to solutions and have you in regular communications with software engineers. Um, I would consider looking into positions like that because you could very quickly get into a more technical developer role from that point if you have your foot in the door of the company. That's the main thing that I would say, and something that, since you've challenged me, that I've said in the past that I would definitely recommend, like stand by now still, is there's a role out there that you're qualified for that is right next door to that engineering position that you want. So if you're having a hard time getting into the field, look into those positions because they're less sought after. Software engineers that were recently laid off are, like, a lot of them are too proud to take those positions or know that they're qualified to go into another software engineering role. So it's still going to be competitive, but much less so than like the SWE position proper.
Yeah, I agree. Just question about that. Why do you think a lot of people don't consider it?
It's just not talked about. Um, yeah, I think that's the main thing, is like the title of software engineer, the salary of software engineer, everything about that is more sexy than like a QA engineer. Like, I'm a quality assurance engineer. Did I really pay $20,000 at a coding boot camp to do this? And like, that's, I think the answer could certainly be yes, because that could get you, like, lowering your barrier to entry for yourself could get you way ahead um, in a really short amount of time. Because if you have the knowledge of an entry level software engineer, the company that you get hired at is going to need a junior developer eventually. And if you have those skills and you're already working for the company and you've been talking to the tech leads in that company, you're going to have a really good shot at getting in that position. So why don't people think about it? I think mainly it's just not as sexy as like software engineer. It doesn't sell boot camp signups, that's for sure. Um, I don't know, the idea of become a QA engineer and then be a software engineer in 6 months. That's a lot less of an alluring tagline for a coding boot camp, but it's probably a faster way to get your foot in the door.
Yeah, my analysis of it is that people are worried that if you become a QA, tests, customer success, support, you'll get pigeonholed in that one. And it'll be hard to branch out. But that will only be true if you stop learning, if you
Right.
stop learning the code. If you get in these positions and you continue to develop your coding skills, that will help you be able to transition to software engineer.
Absolutely. Yeah. Ultimately, you need to ask yourself um, if you need the big position up front, and if you're willing to wait another 6 months to get that, or if you're willing to wait another 2 months and then potentially like pivot out of that relatively quickly. And for me, it's the latter. That makes more sense to me.
Yeah,
But yeah.
because some people get complacent with their job and they
Yeah.
don't push themselves afterwards. But if you push yourself, it's all good.
And that's going to be a problem either way, man. Like, if you get into QA and you can't push yourself to, like, get to the SWE position, the same thing's going to happen if it takes 6 or 9 months to get your first SWE position out of boot camp and you're sitting on your ass unemployed. It's going to be, you're going to be in the same predicament, but at least you're employed in one of the situations.
Right. Yeah, this has been great. What's your YouTube channel? Where can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me basically LinkedIn and YouTube are the two places that you can reliably find me. Both of those you can find just by looking up Colby, Jax, Colby Jax. That's me. Simple enough.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.